Welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George, and today we're asking, is there light at the end of the tunnel? Thank you so much for downloading this week's episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. You can find all of our podcasts on deloitte.co.uk/Green Room podcasts. And today we're taking a slightly different approach. It's our 2-year anniversary of doing the podcast. So rather than having guests, I'm joined by Lizzie and Ethan today. How are you, Lizzie?
Hey, George. I'm very well, thank you. Gosh, 2 years. That has gone fast. So yeah, personally, I'm 2 years older and wiser and looking forward to a bit of a look back over what we've been hearing from amazing guests over the last couple of years on these podcasts.
Yeah, and what an eventful 2 years it has been. But it is nice to be joined by both of you. Other than our special episodes with Richard Houston, CEO of Deloitte, we rarely get to do this. So it's nice to share a room, even if it is a virtual one.
Yeah, we're still stuck in the virtual green room, but hopefully we'll all be back in our great studio very soon. But yeah, it's our 2-year anniversary. We've recorded over 20 hours of interviews with 50 different guests, ranging from CEOs to apprentices and activists. And I think we thought this would be a great opportunity just to have a moment of reflection, really, on the last 2 years, which it hasn't always been plain sailing, and the last 12 months certainly has been tough for everyone. So I think the question this week is there light at the end of the tunnel? And I think we've covered so many really important, huge, complex issues, ranging from discrimination in the workplace or broadly, more broadly, sustainability, climate issues, the impact of technology on jobs and the high street, and all sorts of different topics. So it's a great time just to sit back and take a look at where we've come from, and actually talk about actually some of the hopeful things which are at the end of all this.
Okay, so true to form, I think we're going to kick things off with an icebreaker. Just waiting for one to pop up in my chat. This time just for us. No guest that we can pass it on to. Who's going to take it first?
Okay, shall I ask this?
Yeah, go for it, Lizzie.
Okay. If you were famous, what would it be for?
I think I've mentioned my two talents many times on this podcast, so I will go with both. So love quizzing, love dancing. So a dancing quiz host, I think, would be my what I was famous for.
That is the next Saturday night family viewing for everyone, I think. So that needs to happen. My sort of day job is in public relations, and it's always the mantra is don't become the story yourself. But I think if I had to be famous, then it'll probably be more for infamy than anything, or world domination.
Brilliant. I'm along the same lines as Ethan, in that there's this kind of dual sort of things I'd like to do. And one is always my interest in all things medical and sort of part of me that wanted to become a doctor. And the other part is my interest in performing and becoming a famous actor. So I guess, as I think we mentioned on a podcast once in the past, my perfect role is to be in Holby City.
I see that none of us mentioned the green room. We could all be famous for this podcast blowing up.
Well, that's true. I mean, we're on the right lines. We are award-winning after all. It's not that I like to talk about the fact that we're award-winning, but, definitely on the right lines to becoming famous, aren't we?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think, that sort of sets us up nicely. In 2 years, we have covered quite a lot of ground, and we have won a few awards. We've started a blog. We're getting a lot of traction. And I think it's, that's why it's so important just to sort of sit back and take a moment to reflect on that and look ahead as well. So perhaps we should just start diving into it. And one of the core theme of, quite a few of our Green Room episodes has been around education. And Lizzie and I were just chatting earlier. Now more so than ever, I think people are realizing how important education is. I think we're both homeschooling at the moment, and it's not unchallenging.
Definitely. I mean, I think the advantages are many with the homeschooling in particular. Definitely teaches independence. So my 8-year-old, nearly 9-year-old is so much more competent now with technology, and takes the independence to log on to his Zoom calls, which has got to be a good skill to learn. Another advantage is I'm actually a lot more involved in what he's learning. So it's been quite eye-opening for me to see what he's being taught at any one time. On the downside, I can be in the middle of a work Zoom call, and he can make a spectacular entrance. He burst in on a call the other day telling me that he had to make a mosque, which everyone was then able to sort of feed back some ideas as how we might do that. And I was also on a call where I had turned my video off, and it was quite a large number of people on a Zoom call. And I'd had to let the dog in at the same time. So I had my video off, I was letting the dog in, I was bending over trying to wipe her paws. Meanwhile, Oliver in the background had turned my video back on again and started dancing and sort of waving his hands around. So everyone on the call could see him. I had no idea, but they all told me about it afterwards. So, on the plus side, it allows, I guess, everyone to bring a bit of themselves to their work. And from an education perspective, I think there should be pluses that we recognise as well as some of the challenges.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective as someone who doesn't have children, I think it's been quite like a breath of fresh air. I mean, it's easy for me to say this because I don't have to deal with juggling everything, but it's been quite a breath of fresh air to bring that human element to work. And I feel like a lot of the boundaries of what can sometimes be a bit stuffy and a bit formal, especially when it comes to video calls, has just been broken down because it has to be. And I think everyone's kind of learning to adapt and tolerate different things that they perhaps wouldn't have tolerated before. But that's not to minimize the difficulty of managing, educating, and looking after children and completing what the demands of your day job, which are often more than they were before the crisis.
Yeah, and actually, Ethan, you raise a good point there. I think our very first episode, we talked about the impact of skills and education on our children's future. And I think, it's such a huge issue at the moment, and that real, moral and ethical gripe about how is this going to impact an entire generation of children right now? But and actually on that episode, Ethan, I recall you shared some of your own experiences from your time as a teacher, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I think I've brought a lot of that into my job and into this podcast. Here I am in our very first episode talking to Anne-Marie Malley about the jobs of the future and the skills we'll need to succeed.
I read recently that the majority of children will work in jobs that currently don't exist. So as the education sector or as businesses, how do we kind of address those? How do we know what kind of skills to teach, and how do we prepare them for things that we don't know what's coming up?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's definitely, those jobs are not, well, we can't even imagine what those jobs will be, therefore what we think we should be educating our children. But I think there is definitely a realisation and a move through our research into the skills that will be required, which are much more, not the 3 Rs, but I think what we're calling the 3 Cs, which are more around communication, which includes empathy, emotional intelligence, creativity, and then also cognitive, so the whole problem-solving point, which is where I think we found today that machine learning, AI, is just not as attuned and can't quite replicate those skills. So I think a move to those kind of skills within our education system is probably good. But you used to be a teacher, Ethan. What's your perspective?
I did used to be a teacher. No, I agree. I think the kind of the broad-based skills, like as you mentioned, creativity, problem solving, that kind of complement the new technology and what we foresee the new technology to be, is more important than ever kind of teaching for a specific job, especially at a younger age. It's more about building those skills, definitely.
And that was from our episode, which was "What will be the last job on Earth?" And actually, Ethan, you were impressively predictive there. I think the last year has totally accelerated that, and that need for having those broad, adaptable, flexible skills, regardless of age, really, is going to prove extremely valuable in the long term, I think. And just going back to the point around our children's perspectives on things, just being around your child while they're learning is fascinating, because they always approach challenges and problems in different ways, or ways that you certainly wouldn't expect, and that's always interesting. And that harks back to another episode that feels quite relevant, where we had a great conversation with Annie Wong and Kate Robertson, who's founder of the One Young World program, and where that discussion was all about talking about the value of young minds and fresh perspectives.
I think, like you're saying, it's a balance between knowing your worth and knowing that you have fresh energy and a different perspective to offer, but also respecting and appreciating the wealth of knowledge that comes with experience and skills and being around the industry for so long and seeing different waves of change. And I think the latter part is largely there. There's a lot of respect and appreciation for experienced people and partners and things who have been business leaders who have been around for however many years. But I think it's the young people knowing their worth and being able to say, okay, I don't have 20 years of experience in this industry, but I have fresh energy and a different perspective and a different way of looking at things that can ride the wave of change and help us be more efficient, more effective, do better in society, do better for our business.
That was a really, really good conversation, that, and it's it does go to that point that the value of having a fresh approach to things, in balance with experience in tackling those problems as well. So it's very relevant for what's going on at the moment, I think.
Absolutely, and I remember Annie talking about the young board members, and I believe that she was one of those. And I think initiatives like that link quite nicely to the first clip in terms of getting the perspective on what the skills are, what's coming up the track, what the young people are interested in, from an employee retention point of view, from a training perspective, all of those things. I think that whole episode is quite eye-opening on the different things that businesses could do to improve that.
Moving on, I mean, another aspect which we've touched on a lot actually in the last 2 years of shows has been mental health, and I've learned an incredible amount of this, and being in such a fortunate position to talk to brilliant, fascinating people about their experiences all around this. So, and I think going alongside what's happened in the last year with the pandemic, where people have had to open up and talk about their mental health or mental ill health, it's been very positive in that sense, I think, and constructive. I think that if the question of the week is there light at the end of the tunnel, I think the evolution of talking about mental health publicly and openly has gone from leaps and bounds in the last few months, which is must surely be a good thing.
For sure, George. Yeah, absolutely. That stigma from years gone by, I think, is being well and truly lifted, and people recognise that they're not alone in dealing with mental health challenges. Certainly Deloitte and many organisations are supporting their employees and encouraging us all to sort of share our stories. So now more than ever, so important.
Yeah, and I remember Jeff McDonald, talking about how we need to think about mental health like we do physical health. And I think that we are making steps in that direction. I mean, I do think the lockdown has shown that people can be quite hard on themselves, because it's an incredibly emotionally draining, traumatic thing that we've all lived through. And I mean, added burden, well, I shouldn't really describe it as a burden, but added responsibility for people like both of you with having to look after children as well as balance work commitments.
Going back to our guest from episode 14, Jeff McDonald, and he was one who totally lied to me about the difference between mental health and mental ill health.
Part of what I try to do is encourage more and more people to just tell their stories, because we've all got a story, and we've all been on the kind of edge, or if we haven't got a story ourselves, we've got a friend, we've got a daughter, we've got a brother, we've got a sister. We've all got a story, and I think the more we tell those stories, I often say every story that we tell is like sending a lifeboat out into the ocean. And all those people that are struggling and suffering in silence, do you know what they do? They cling onto the lifeboat, and they realize that they might just be normal and not alone.
Jeff explains it really well there, and throughout the episode, actually, it's really important now to highlight that, and do go back to listen to it in full. It's all available on our website.
Yeah, I mean, I love what Jeff was saying there about the lifeboats going out, and the fact that if we're sharing our stories, that's helping others. I think one of the podcast episodes I've been involved in, which I've really enjoyed and learned a lot from, was the episode about imposter syndrome, which of course is an element of our mental well-being and how we sort of view ourselves and the world around us. And on that episode, we talked to Sharon Thorne and Poppy German, and that was such an important conversation, learning from very senior people that even they have struggled and continue to struggle with imposter syndrome, and that sense of being found out and not being as clever as other people around the table. And it doesn't mean that they haven't learnt to deal with it, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily go away. And I think we've got a clip where Sharon explains what imposter syndrome means to her and how she's been living with it for a long time.
So I think it's this feeling, you've been working for a number of years, and you've managed to get to a certain position, but you're still waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, you've got away with it for a long time, but we found you out, and, you're going to have to leave. You are not good enough. You've been able to skate over things and get to where you've got to, but actually, fundamentally, you can't really do the job. So, you're going to have to move on. So that it's that feeling of, you're not good enough, that the people around you have much greater capabilities. And when you watch them, that you sort of have this feeling of inadequacy because they just look so much smarter, better. You don't feel, it'll be different things for different people, but, do you feel smart enough? And that, that is a fundamental that has been with me for a very long time. And, you overcome it, and, I'm sure we'll get onto it, at different times in your life, it's not particularly prevalent, and then something will happen. You'll maybe get a new job, or you'll be put into a situation which is much more challenging and demanding, and all of those fears just come rushing back. And people who work with me think I'm incredibly confident, and if they hear about this issue I have, they're really surprised, and then you almost think, do they think I'm lying? Because it's another fear. Another part of the imposter thing is, oh my goodness, they must think I'm lying.
So Deloitte's global chair, Sharon Thorne, sharing her experiences of imposter syndrome, and she's pretty much our most senior person at Deloitte globally. And if she feels that she's an imposter in her role, then it's no wonder that 70% of people are affected by this as well. I think what I recall that episode, I was particularly struck by how she was physically sick before a Davos meeting, in front of all sorts of other statesmen and politicians and things like that. It was a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, I think it's Poppy as well, talking about that when she was due to attend a cabinet meeting with the Prime Minister as part of her role championing a mental health in the workplace campaign. And, just hearing these stories about, people who suffer in this way, I think we had a lot of feedback to that episode from people who had felt the same way, but hadn't necessarily openly talked about it before. And we're very grateful that we were able to air that episode and talk a bit more about it. I mean, I certainly recognised myself through that episode and the conversation we had with Sharon and Poppy, and at different times in my career, I think I've been affected by imposter syndrome. I think actually at the beginning of that episode, I said something like, surely if no one ever has any sense of imposter syndrome, are they not just a psychopath? And being told pretty quickly that wasn't necessarily the case. But I think what I was trying to get across was, I think at different times, we all question ourselves, and often it's a great driver to us being successful and pushing ourselves at work. So yeah, it's something which, as you said, George, affects 70% of people. So the fact that we're out there talking about it now, hopefully people feel a little less alone.
And if you don't ask questions about yourself, then you're absolutely right there, Lizzie. How do you get from A to B? So I think that's very relevant to kind of the discussion we're having today about which broadly speaking is about hope and arriving at your destination and ending up somewhere which is better than when you started.
Yeah, and I was quite jealous of not being involved in that episode, because it's probably my favourite episode that I've listened to date. Helped that it didn't have my voice that I had to cringe through, but I thought it was really, really excellent, and I think it shows that I think it's our most listened to episode. Clearly resonated with so many people. It definitely resonated with me, not a psychopath. And we've had a lot of responses, you say. And I think it was also quite prescient in terms of that intersection with gender and race, and how I kind of, the way we view things in society and how that can affect people personally. I think it linked really well with the mental health episode. And I think, and to carry on the theme of what we've been talking about in this section, and even at the beginning, that idea of people probably wouldn't have been comfortable to talk about this 5 years ago. And even in the last 12 months, it's a lot of these walls are being broken down. Like, we're seeing into each other's lives, we're seeing each other as human beings with family and kids, and we can start talking honestly about things like mental health and bringing that to work as a part of our whole selves. And I think that's one of the great steps of progress we've made, and one of the lights at the end of the tunnel, I guess.
And linked to that, Ethan, you're absolutely spot on there. But none of us can get away from the fact that diversity and racial discrimination was such an important part of 2020, and similar to mental health. The conversation really grew and has hopefully moved on and has become a lot more open and transparent and more publicly spoken about. And I think that's probably been a bit of a turning point, certainly in the world of business, in terms of becoming a critical agenda, tackling diversity in the workplace. Last summer's Black Lives Matter movement really helped shine a very important spotlight on systemic racism, which has been endured by Black people for centuries and far too long. And I think we had some excellent episodes tackling this in October for Black History Month, and that really helped to get under the skin of what does it mean to be Black in Britain today. Here we've got Sandra Kerr, who's the race director at Business in the Community, who's sharing about how she thinks businesses have responded to the events from last year.
I had a huge response from our businesses saying to me, what should we do? And the three things that I kind of did a blog post and called out for them to look at, the first one was on leadership. So you're covering these in your action plan. And that's around how do you ensure you get voices of Black people around those key decision-making tables where you're making decisions that impact them, because not having their voice is risk. It means you can make decisions and come up with things that you think, oh my God, so when it's gone out and gone horribly wrong, if you had those people around the table, they would have said, no way. If you think about Windrush, if you had Black people from that background at the high level decision-making program, that would have never happened, because we would have said, excuse me, that's my grandmother or my mother. You've got the wrong group. So that's the first one. The second one was around allyship. So we saw Black and white people outside together saying, no, we don't want this. And that's when people say to me, oh, Sandra, is it different? Yes, I believe it is different, because I've been working on this for a long time, and that's the first time seeing that. And this is about the reason why we need that mobilization is what the approach you're taking is how do we kind of take down the systems that are the barriers, rather than what people usually pivot into is let's fix the people. You're like, I'm exhausted. I've got a track record to die for. I don't need any more kind of development, please. And I have to kind of join in with David. Saying that, look, without some great sponsors, many who were white men because they were the ones with the power, or white women, I'm very grateful for opening doors and talking about me in rooms that weren't in, behind my back, and opportunities, and even challenging me and saying, if I say why, I don't think so, and they say why not, and then, did that kind of door opening thing. And obviously, without any talent to kind of display, that would have been a high risk for them. But what they were saying, I see the talent and I'm going to use my privilege and opportunity and open doors and speak for you when you don't even know there's an opportunity. So that bit I think is really important, and the advocacy. And then the third area was about listening to employees and they will help you connect to communities. So that very much, the thing to do, which was absolutely right, was to listen and is to keep listening.
Sandra raised a really good point there, which actually is a bit of a microcosm of what this podcast is about. And it's actually why it's important to have these conversations and talk about these issues. And something like race or gender, sexuality, religion, disability, climate change, all of these things impact everyone. Doesn't matter who you are, but they are kind of threads of society, really. And I think they're the sort of themes which have come up time and time again on this podcast. And hopefully we're trying to do our bit to ask, tricky questions and do our bit to make sure that people are talking about it, or at least hearing others talk about it.
George, you mentioned when you introed the clip about the Black Lives Matter movement and how that really did force a light on the issue. And I remember talking to David about, in the aftermath of that, really having to reconcile what Deloitte were going to do to acknowledge this moment and to make steps towards improving the experience for their Black employees. And David, as one of the handful of Black partners, led a conversation, I think. And I think he said it was one of the most eye-opening and raw conversations he had with other members of the firm talking about their own experience. And I think it's conversations like that are probably happening in businesses everywhere that are really driving this.
We talked a bit earlier about the episode looking at imposter syndrome, and one of our guests was Poppy Jaman, and I think we mentioned the fact that she had a big presentation to give at number 10 Downing Street, but she shared how her identity as a BAME woman contributed to symptoms of imposter syndrome before that meeting. Let's listen to the clip.
I was thinking about what's the sort of the last time that I've had that massive surge of, oh my goodness, I'm definitely not good enough and everybody's definitely cleverer than me and what on earth am I doing here, was on the 10th of October 2017, Tuesday. I was invited to a cabinet meeting by the Prime Minister and Jeremy Hunt, the Minister for Health at the time, to do a presentation on England's public mental health campaign, and it was incredible to be invited to, I was going to present to the PM and the cabinet, and wow. And then it was that whole, oh my God, why do they want me there? Is it because I'm a black woman? Is it because I'm representing mental health and actually, do you know what I mean? So I got into justifying, it's not really me they want in that room. It's actually the agendas that I represent. So immediately I undermined myself completely. And then on the day, Simon Wesley, who was then the chair of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, he was sort of the second person. So he and I were both invited. I was leading it, and he was supposed to do one slide at the last 2 minutes, which was around the technicalities. But when Simon and I met, I was like, oh, well, you should definitely go first and you lead that. And that's another thing that we'll do, because I think by default, I thought, well, he's much cleverer than me. I mean, he's a scientist and he's a medic, and of course he should, and he's a man. So, why, I'm just a BME woman. And then he looked at me and he just went, this is your gig. You're the expert here. I'm the technical support, so I'll do that bit, and let's work out how we're going to do it. And it was a lovely moment where I was reminded on a very practical level that I was the expert. This was my area of expertise. He was there to support me, and that's what we were doing.
Poppy Jarman, OBE, CEO of City Mental Health Alliance, sharing her experience. And I can say she is brilliant, so I agree with her self-assessment there. But
that was it. Yeah, it was a great clip, that, from Poppy. And it reminded me of that thing she said about how conversations are good, but it's those really practical actions like that sponsorship, that coaching, those little day-to-day things that you can do and practically to help kind of break down some of those stereotypes and give people that confidence. And I think it reminded that conversation we had with Sandra and David as well. But yeah, she sounds great, Poppy. I'm sad I didn't get to meet her.
And we touched on breaking down stereotypes as well in an episode talking about stereotypes around traditional gender roles back in season 2, I think, where we asked if fathers have it easy. And it's this was one which is close to my heart because it is annoying when people assume that you're a bit of a Homer Simpson when it comes to dadding. But again, the reality is parenting roles are changing extremely fast. And I've been working from home for almost a year now, so it's challenging these outdated stereotypes is really important. And we had a great discussion with Jim Bloomfield, who decided to take an extended shared parental leave. I think he's going to talk about this now.
The first point to make is everyone does it differently, don't they? So there's no easy answer to the question as such, because every team setup is different. So I've definitely faced a few of those questions, those challenges on the way. We've set our team up in a way that's not the same as many people. I took 9 months parental leave. My wife returned to work before I did. That was quite unusual. So that raised a few eyebrows at the time and certainly raised a few questions from people. But that's the way we chose to set the team up at the time. My wife wanted to return to work earlier. She felt as though that was the best thing to do for her career. And I wanted all the time I could possibly get with Seb. So daddy daycare was definitely mentioned a few times during that period. But it didn't take me too long to get people to understand that actually having 3 months off with my son all to myself was not daycare, but full-time parenting, and something that I absolutely treasured at the time.
One of my biggest gripes as a dad is always trying to find a baby changing table in the gents or somewhere where you can access it. But it's less of a problem when you're at home all the time or under lockdown. So that's been a much less of a headache with my second child.
One of the memories I've got from that episode was the morning that we were recording it. My husband had set off early and driven up to Cambridge where he was working, and I was up against the clock of getting my son to school and then driving back from school, walking to the station, getting to London. And of course, just as we're about to leave the house, a big 4-pint bottle of milk sitting on the kitchen table gets knocked over. Milk goes everywhere. It goes all over the kitchen floor. It goes all over me. It goes all over my son. We're running around trying to get it all cleared up, trying to get off to do these different things. And I remember thinking at the time, what a topical episode to record, because yes, working fathers do have it bloomin' easy, actually. Of course they don't, but yeah, that was my setup for the day.
You've got all this to look forward to at some point, Ethan.
I know, yeah, I was just thinking.
But and perhaps we should move on. But another big thread of the last 2 years has been sustainability, and how we can try and find some sort of resolution or use technology in an innovative way to tackle climate change and other sustainability issues. So even from very early on, we were trying to grapple how to live a bit of a more sustainable life. We had a fantastic discussion back in season 1 where we spoke to the founders of a zero waste supermarket called the Clean Kilo. And at the time, it was quite a novel idea, but actually since then, I've seen all sorts of plastic-free or packaging-free supermarkets pop up all over the place, which is brilliant, actually.
That's one of the small things, but we also did an episode on the big things. And I think that was another one of my highlights of the last 2 years, was talking to Netflix's director of the One Planet series, Colin Butfield, as well as Siobhan Gardner, who leads our Deloitte climate studio, about some of the amazing things that they were doing in terms of technology and how that can be harnessed to tackle climate change.
Ethan, you mentioned being envious of not being involved in the imposter syndrome episode, and I feel the same way actually about that episode. It was such a great one to listen to, and Siobhan and Colin are both so passionate and interesting to listen to, and it's one of those episodes with the chemistry. And talking of light at the end of the tunnel, I listened to that episode and definitely felt really hopeful about the future of the planet and what we have to gain rather than what we have to lose. I think Colin mentions that sustainability, people think that means you have to give something up, but actually there's a lot that you get back. I think he shared quite a few practical tips for how we can all help, and I think there's a clip here where he talks about that.
I mean, I think the first thing is that I don't actually think that it should be viewed as a negative. I think part of the problem is actually we think of a sustainable world as something that requires us giving things up. Whereas if we looked at it the other way around and thought about all the gains we could get from sustainability and sort of took this view of, okay, we're all going to be alive on this planet with a bit of luck in 10 years' time. We're going to want to have businesses that are viable in 10 years' time. We're going to want to have jobs. We're going to have to want various things. Well, how does building a sustainable world help? And you think, well, we gain clean air if we get this right. We gain new businesses in all the ways Siobhan just talked about and numerous other sectors. We gain food that we can rely on and food crops that we can rely on. We gain a bountiful ocean back again. If you ask most people, do they want those things in 10 years' time? The answer would be, of course, yes. The problem is that some of the ways we approach the current systems almost embed the practices that are undermining it. So I think that sort of flip change in attitude of, okay, we want to move towards the things that are good, as opposed to feeling like we need to give things up. And that starts to unleash a number of different solutions that make things possible. So as an individual, to get finally back to your question, because I think it is about that attitude of imagining, first of all, a positive future, a future that you really want stuff out of, and making that known, because that then changes the attitudes of governments and businesses. It provides the fertile ground for the entrepreneurs that will solve some of these challenges and create the new businesses that will give us what we need. But it's also about where your biggest impacts as individuals can lie. Now, for me, for a lot of people in the country I'm in at the moment, the UK, a lot of the biggest things we can do is where our money is. That's clearly not the same for everybody in the world, but if you're in a fortunate position to have savings or pensions, they have to be going into the good things, not the bad things. So moving your money, if you're in the fortunate position to have money, to something that supports the things you believe in. The other big ones about how we move around, so energy and the food we get. And again, I'd say for everybody individually, it's about supporting the things you believe in. Transferring your electricity tariff to a renewable one helps support that. Choosing the food you buy wisely, I mean, reduction in meat consumption for sure, but where you do purchase meat and fish, making sure it's from a good source. That sort of approach, but making your voice heard is probably the biggest thing. Telling businesses, governments, you'll support the good stuff. Because that unleashes innovation and it lets the market work in a way that can unleash some of the big solutions.
I think, George, that's a good place to start to potentially address the big question. But just before we do, I think I'd like to know from you two, what has been your favourite moment of the podcast so far?
Oh, it's too many to mention. There's just obviously meeting the guests and having these brilliant conversations and hearing different perspectives and kind of opening your eyes. Every episode, there's a great moment, and if I can indulge a little bit myself in being a podcast co-host, which I absolutely love, I get a buzz every time we walked into that green room studio, and I really miss it. I don't know about you guys, but just walking in, I still remember the very first episode when I walked in and Kaylin, our wonderful producer, asked me if I wanted a coffee, and I sort of suddenly felt like some kind of superstar. And that has tempered slightly, but I just get a buzz every time being involved in it, and getting that buzz.
I feel that buzz too, Lizzie, but that might be because of all the cabling in the room.
But it's not quite the same virtually, is it? Yeah, it's not quite the same anymore. And then there was just different episodes. Like, we've talked a lot about the imposter syndrome episode, and that was so eye-opening. That was definitely a favourite moment. I enjoyed the conversation we had with David Sproul. I do remember him, our previous CEO, saying at one point that he would take us all out. I don't think that ever happened, so we really ought to follow up with him on that. It's just loads of highlights. What about you guys?
I think for me, I've got two. So I think one was when we were talking to Kate Robertson, who's the founder of One Young World, on episode 16. And she was telling this story about how she was talking to one of the leading Hong Kong protesters while he was in prison. And I can't really remember the details of exactly what we were discussing. I think it was about how brave he was to have effectively given up his life, as it was not looking likely that he'd get out of prison anytime soon. And it was just one of those moments where you get goosebumps and you realize kind of the privilege that you have of talking to these people who are so passionate and have achieved these amazing things and are so knowledgeable, and we get the opportunity to interview them. And then I think the other one has to be the first episode, because I was just so nervous but so excited. I still get nervous and excited, but it's less so. And I think I remember my very first question to Anne-Marie was like a repeat of something she'd already said, and I still haunts me. But I think specifically on that episode, it was doing the quiz at the end, and it went down well. And I've actually got a quiz for you both that if we have time, I can do.
Yay, a quiz! Do you know what, Ethan? I was secretly hoping, is Ethan going to do a quiz? Bring it on.
I can do one. Okay. This is George versus Lizzie quiz. So question 1. Who were the guests on the first episode that you two recorded together?
So this was about the criminal underworld.
Yes. What can we learn from the underground economy? Okay, question 2. When interviewing Deloitte CEO Richard Houston for the first time on episode 13, we discussed both favourite school subjects and favourite types of music. So, A, what did I say was my favourite subject at school?
Dance.
Correct.
Yes.
Very good, Lizzie.
Thank you.
What did Richard Houston say was his favourite type of music? And there are 2 possible answers, and you get extra kudos if you can name a specific artist.
I think it was trance, wasn't it?
I'll give you that, yeah, trance dance.
Was it also heavy metal?
No, so that was the one type he didn't like. It was film.
Oh, right.
I feel like Avicii came up on discussion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well done, George. You have a full point for that. Definitely in the lead.
Yeah.
Okay, the final one. On episode 25, do we care more about a brand or what they stand for? We asked our guests to share their favourite brands. Can you name one of the brands that they mentioned? And there's 3 possible answers.
So Annabelle Rake shared my passion for Lego.
Correct.
I think, Ethan, you're well and truly on your way to becoming a dancing quiz show host on Saturday night television. So this is good. But I think maybe let's try and do this properly for a change and try and actually answer the big question this week ourselves. Perhaps we should just go around. Do we think there is light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. So I think absolutely yes. I think our episodes on technology and climate change was a really good example of how we can kind of come together and support each other as a species and how adaptable we are to these situations. I mean, I think however terrible COVID has been, it has also demonstrated that communities can come together and support each other, that businesses can come together and build supply chains and distribution networks at rapid pace. I think it just shows how adaptable we are. I do think that it's thrown in some questions about how we view essential work, and why some of the lowest paid in society were some of the ones that we leaned on the most. And obviously, I think racial inequality and how it's shown how that can manifest itself in public health and life expectancy. And these are all things that we need to address. But I think we are moving towards acknowledging them and addressing them. So yeah, I think definitely light at the end of the tunnel.
I would agree with you there. I think the challenges we're facing are unprecedented, and it's enough to get anyone down when you think about them too much. But thankfully, we are surrounded by people who are focused on finding the answers to those challenges. And, you know, one of the key things that's come through on this episode today and through episodes we've recorded in the past is just the importance of talking and sharing and listening. And if we all do more of that, particularly the listening, you know, I like to think that we'll come to the answers together. So definitely a rocky road ahead. And the other thing that gives me great hope, and I have to say, I've just been joined by my number one podcast fan, and that is 8-year-old Oliver, who was very keen today to say a little hello, weren't you? Do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Oliver. How are you?
How are you?
Good. Do you think there's light at the end of the tunnel?
I don't know what that means, but yeah.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Oliver. I think none of us really knows, and actually that's very similar for most episodes. We don't really know how to answer these questions, but broadly speaking, we come to some sort of conclusion at the end. So yeah, thank you very much for your thoughts there, Oliver.
Well done, Ollie, for answering this week's big question.
And thanks for your positivity as well. George, how about you to finish it off?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think very much echo both your points here. I think it is good to talk. Conversation is key. Listening is more important than ever, really. And if people don't have a voice, and if people don't listen, then you can't really progress, really, no matter what the subject matter is. So I think that's definitely been a major learning from me on this. And as a naturally nosy person, it's been a fascinating couple of years, just finding out about different people's lives and experiences. So long may it continue. I think we've got some exciting episodes coming up, talking about the business of sport. We've got a special International Women's Day edition as well planned, and we're also going to tackle how the news cycle is impacting our mental health. So all those sort of subjects, which hopefully will be of interest. But if any listener does have any topics they want us to try and tackle, then please do get in touch with contact details on our website.
Thanks, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure catching up and reminiscing.
It's been awesome. Here's to another 2 years.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Green Room. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back next time with another big question. This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.